What's going on, everyone? How are you all doing today? I'm Jay here with Spro Coffee, and we're doing what is this? This is our 12th coffee Q&A. I hope you can hear me. And let me turn the volume a little bit. This is our 12th coffee Q&A, and it's now Tuesday, October 12th, 2021. And so we do the coffee Q&A every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. So if you have any coffee questions, be sure to drop them in the comments below. If you're watching on the replay, drop those in the comments as well, and we'll answer them for next week. So let us know what you think. And yeah, so today's, let me pull this a little bit closer. So we had a little bit of technical difficulty before we kicked off, like about 2 minutes ago before we started. Had a little bit of technical difficulty, so I had to try to work through that really quickly. And finally got that, I think we got it sorted, so we should be good to go. So how y'all doing today? What's happening? What's going on? On today's episode, we're going to be drinking coffee as always, but also today's show is really about helping to develop your palate. How are the techniques that are available to you to develop your tasting ability? So, and where does this come from? Like, since I've been in coffee for over the last 20 years, you know, we do a lot of tastings. We work with a lot of people, and we're both on professional levels as well as consumers. And one of the biggest things that I always hear from people is that, oh, I can never taste like you, or I can't taste like that. And it's like, you know what? It's my firm belief that you can, that everyone can taste. Just as Gustav from well, what's that movie? Just from as Chef Gustav from Ratatouille said, anyone can cook. I think anyone can taste. And that's really, to be the bottom line. And so the basic premise of what we're going to be talking about today is that it's really just about taking the time to learn how to taste and to think about what you're tasting, really. You know what I'm saying? So we all know how to taste. We do it every day. Everything that we touch and eat and consume, we're always tasting it. Does it taste good? Does it taste bad? Does it taste, or do we like it? Do we hate it? But when it comes to, like, you know, discussing about coffee or teas or wines or beers or anything like that, and you hear these people waxing poetic about all kinds of details about those products, it's really only because they've taken the time to think about it. And that's what we're going to be encouraging you to do today, is to think about what you're tasting and how to develop that vocabulary about tasting in order to help you. And is it really helpful? I mean, it's one of those things where, like, you know, if you'd like to have maybe a deeper appreciation of what you're tasting or what you're doing, then it's worth it. Or if you just want to be able to combat the snobs at your coffee cupping or at your wine tasting or beer, you know, sampling, this will help you do it. All right, so today we're going to start off with some coffee making. And I thought that, you know, we'll do the cupping style, since this is about tasting and cupping is always about tasting critically. So we've got our glass here, cupping glass. We've got 13 grams, so the 9-ounce glass, we're using 13 grams of coffee, medium kind of grind. And this is the Finca Limoncillo from Matagalpa, Nicaragua. And it is made by the Mears family. It's a yellow Pacamara, and yellow Pacamara is basically a hybrid coffee between the Pacas and the Maragogipe varietals. And they hybridize them, making this massive coffee bean, like whether it's green or roasted. If you compare them to the standard Arabica, Típica, or Catuai, any of those, this bean is just massive. Like, it's just physically bigger. Like, it's actually a little bit of a problem, because it's so much larger than other beans that we actually adjust the roasting quantity for when we're roasting it, because we want to make sure that we have enough space, tumbling space, and enough place for it to run. And then we also, it's actually, when you see the yellow Pacamara bag, you know, we're using the same gusseted type size bags for all of our coffees. I mean, it physically is larger because the beans are just so much bigger, right? So, anyway, we're going to set our timer here to 4 minutes. And we're going to pour our water in one long strong pour, which is while saturating all the coffee. So this is the typical way we do cuppings, and you can find many videos on our channel about this. Here on the Spro channel, we've got a couple of videos showing you how to cup and the different methodologies and steps to doing it. So I would check those out. I don't want to necessarily bore you and burn too much time just talking about the different nuance and minutia of cupping coffee. So as you can see, the coffee floats on top, as well as some of it's falling to the bottom, right? You can see some of the bottom here, and you can actually see the detail right here. It's falling, falling, falling. So that's falling, and it's steeping, but we're going to leave the cap on, right? And then we're going to smell the fragrance. Oh, well, actually, that's what I forgot to do for that. In the rush to do this, we normally smell the dry. So let's grab the container that it was in. No, that doesn't really tell us. There's a warm aromatic tone, slightly acidic, just very light brightness. Maybe some cookies, like imagine if you baked chocolate chip cookies without the chocolate chips. That kind of smell, that baked, doughy. Nice. And so here's what we're saying. So I say baked, doughy, chocolate, chocolate chip cookies without the chocolate chips. And these are all descriptors that are relatively common, right? Like I try to break things down in a simple term, and think about correlating flavors to things that people are familiar with. Most people have had chocolate chips, so most people can understand that a chocolate chip cookie without the chips, and they'll have a particular aroma in mind, right? And that's part of the connection. So a lot of this has to do with tasting a wide range of foods and everything, and pretty much anything that you would consume, you should try consuming, just so that you have an understanding of what those items are like to experience. Because they say, like in coffee, people they say that coffee has over 800 aromatic compounds creating everything about it. People say that's more complex than wine. So certainly more than beer. And people wax so eloquently poetic about wines, on and on and on. And coffee can be more complex than that. So this is something for you to wax poetic on. All right, while we're waiting here, how much more time do we have? We got about another 45 seconds. So remember, there are 5 basic tastes that you're able to perceive. There's sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and the more recent discovery over the last, or at least the most recent acknowledgement over the last 20 years or so, is what they call umami. And umami is that savoriness, that kind of savory, unctuous character of food that you get from things like mushrooms, meat, cheese. And those are the 5 basic senses that make up taste. And that's really what we use to explore taste. And then we do things, time's up. We do things that will help us to develop that. All right, so now we're going to take our spoon, we're going to break the crust. Maybe I will illuminate this. A little bit sharp on the nose, and gosh, kinds of hints of sarsaparilla. That's interesting. That I was not expecting. All right, we're going to take and skim the top. right, skimming the top. Now, basically, we want to let it cool down a bit so that it's easier to taste. So when you have product that's very, very cold or very, very hot, those temperature extremes occlude your ability to taste everything that's there. So you want to, when it comes to coffee, we're going to let it cool down a bit. Typically, we waited 4 minutes before we started to do the break. So we want to wait a total of 10 minutes to allow that coffee to cool. But let's have there's kind of a savory, spicy note to it. That initial burst of sarsaparilla has kind of faded away into more of maybe a mesquite spiciness. So if you're just joining us, we're tasting coffees and talking about how to develop your palate. So if you have any questions about that or coffee in general, drop them in the comments below. Be happy to talk about them. And how y'all doing? What's happening? We're just waiting for the coffee to cool so we can really get into it. So one thing that I tell people when they ask about how do they develop their palates and their tasting is really to taste. It's just to really go about their normal lives, right? Go about your normal life, eat what you don't normally eat, but as you're eating, think about it. Think kind of critically about what you're eating. Meaning that as you're eating, let's say you go to the diner and you're having pancakes and grits and, ham steak and eggs. Of course, the simple thing is to think, well, it tastes like pancakes. It tastes like ham steak. It tastes like eggs. But how would you describe that experience? Think about it from the perspective of someone that's never had ham steak or eggs. If you were to tell them, if they were to say to you, hey, what does that taste like? How would you describe that? And that's really the challenge, is to describe what you're tasting as you're tasting it. And so at first it's going to be very difficult, of course. And this is also why we encourage people to taste with others and then have discussions about it, right? So when we're doing cuppings or they're public cuppings with guests at the shop, people will come in, we'll taste the coffees all together, but we'll also ask people to maintain a silent tasting so that as everyone's tasting, write down your own thoughts, but don't discuss and try to refrain from the types of noises we make when we're reacting to things. Like, so a lot of times you're happy at something, so you'll give like a or if it's not so good, oh. So we try to tell people to not do those things, maintain silence, write down your notes, and then once we're done the tasting, we'll sit back down and discuss openly, hey, what did you taste? And part of this is that we don't want people to be tasting and to talk about it at the same time, because then it starts to influence what others people may write and perceive. What we really want is for people to perceive on their own and then discuss. So like the idea is that people will come together and talk about what they've tasted and said, okay, so what did you taste? Well, I tasted this and this and this. And then someone else might be like, oh yeah, I tasted that as well. And by doing that, it helps you to understand better in your mind what you're tasting. Like, okay, I think it tastes like, let's say, for example, you're trying something and you think to yourself, I think it tastes like blueberry. Someone may say to you, oh yeah, that tastes like blueberry. Oh yeah, blueberry. Yeah, that is right. But it's more than just blueberry, right? For example, or strawberry. Let's take strawberry, for example, right? So we think of strawberry or berries in general, or just practically anything, as a certain way. So when I started in this whole coffee or this whole flavor tasting journey was back in like 1999. And I started with a company that I started called J Shave Ice. And it was a Hawaiian shave ice, basically shaven ice, and we poured syrups on it. Here in Baltimore, we call it snowballs. And it's all very simple. And that's how I kind of thought about it first, but we were always trying to find better ways to do it. And so I was never, I use strawberry for example, because I was never very happy with what we could buy as a strawberry flavor. So one day I decided that I needed to go to talk to some of the flavoring manufacturers. So we went to Virginia Dare, and the Virginia Dare is a flavor manufacturer. And it was really, really an interesting conversation. My first conversation was very, very interesting because I was like, well, I'm interested in strawberry. And the rep that I was talking to was, well, here's the deal. We'll send you some samples, and we have, in our catalog, we have 250 strawberries. However, if you don't find any of those to your liking, we can work with you to develop your own strawberry. And I was like, there's 250 strawberries? What kind of craziness is that? How is that even possible? And it turns out that if you think about strawberry, right? So you buy like a pack of strawberries at your grocery store. Like you have the ideal mind of strawberry, right? Like there's this ideal in your mind. And you'll eat your strawberry and they're different. They're not the ideal necessarily. Sometimes they're tart and they're in different stages of their maturity, right? Sometimes you get that box of like strawberries and they're just right. Other times they're not. So each of those are varying degrees of strawberry. And when you get into flavorings, you can specify which degree of maturity of strawberry that you want as your strawberry. It was highly fascinating, and I was like, and that's what I'm saying with this is that when you're talking about flavors, we may just think, oh yeah, just strawberry, but really, what kind of strawberry? How freshly picked? Green? Is it overripe? Things like that. And so but part of that is also helped by discussing. So you can discuss with people and with people that you're tasting with, and hopefully maybe you're discussing with people that have more experience in tasting and thinking about what they're tasting, so that it helps you develop. So when I was learning how to do a lot of tasting, I worked with a lot of friends that were very experienced chefs or very experienced coffee people, and they were kind of leading me on, and like I would taste with them and we would talk about it, and I was like, well, I don't really know what that tastes like. And then they would say what they tasted, and I was like, yeah, that's the right descriptor for it. So it's really about attaching what your experience to the different descriptors. All right, so let us go and do some tasting now. So again, this is the Finca Limoncillo. It's a yellow Pacamara from Nicaragua, made by the Mears family. There's a light bitterness to it. There's a tarty fruit, but it's not a fruit. This is one of the weirder coffees, I think, in my mind. Like when I decided to buy this, it was partially because it had this kind of strange funk to it, right? It's not just like your plain normal coffee. It's got this kind of funkiness, and I'm like, ooh. What is that? This weird twistiness. Actually, it's a twistiness that, quite frankly, I don't even know if I really think is awesome. Like I don't know if I like it. Like my personal preference. Like I don't know if I like the twist that's in the flavor. But it's beautifully clean, well structured. Yeah, it's a strange funk on right here, right there. But good. It's good. It's good. It's just odd. It's just odd. So remember, as you're tasting stuff, you want to also include not just the process of consuming, of eating and tasting with your tongue and on your palate, but also with your nose. The nose is a big component of your taste. It's just like when you're feeling like ill and you get sniffly and you can't really breathe through your nose, you don't really taste a lot because your nose is occluded. And so much of that experience comes through the nose. So always take the time to smell and think about, what are you smelling? Actually, kind of reminiscent of steamed crabs. You know how steamed crabs kind of smell as a smell? There's a little bit of that. Now, here's something else to think about: Gregory's asking, can I ask questions? He says, of course, ask away. So I talked about like crabs, right? Steamed crabs, Maryland blue steamed crabs. Now, here's the thing: it's like as you're cupping or tasting products with a range of people, especially from different regions of the country or different parts of the world, you may run across descriptions that you're not familiar with. Like for someone that's not from Maryland, to say to someone and says, "Oh, it smells like steamed crabs." What the heck does that smell like? If you're not from here, if you're not from Baltimore, maybe you don't know what that means. Or like, for example, if somebody says, I taste jackfruit. Well, what does that mean to someone that doesn't taste that normally, right? So, there's a lot of fruit and a lot of descriptions in foods that may happen in different parts of the world that you're not familiar with. So you may hear things. And so that's one reason why, as you're learning or as you're trying to develop your palate, it's important to go out and taste. Be an adventurous eater. When you're going out to try different restaurants, when you're going out, try different restaurants and order stuff that you may not even like. Like, for example, I was in Sterling, Virginia on Thursday, and I went to this restaurant, this Taiwanese joint. Now, I'm familiar with Taiwanese food pretty well, but, they had these kind of juice drinks, and I was kind of in the mood for like one of these juice drinks, and on the menu, they had one that had watermelon yogurt with orange juice. I was like, oh, good. I like watermelon. Watermelon, very familiar to me, very safe, very open to that. When I told my server, I said, hey, I want that watermelon. She's like, well, it's actually out of season right now. I was like, oh, but we can make something else for you. And I was like, oh, I said, well, what do you like? And she said, well, I like the avocado. So avocado, yogurt, and orange juice. And to be honest, as much as I like guacamole, I'm not really a fan of avocado drink as a drink. I don't know about that. That's a bit not up my alley. But I said to her, hey, it's not really up my alley, but you know what? I'm going to go for it. Because if you like it, I'm going to try it. And so I tried it, and my initial impression was that I wasn't thrilled about it. But as I was drinking and eating and with the meal, it turned out very well. But the more important point is that by going outside your safety zone and trying different things, it helps to expand your palate and your understanding. So Gregory's asking, how do I get into coffee? As in, how do I expand my taste buds and familiarize myself with the whole world of coffee out there other than instant coffee in Starbucks? Well, the best way to do that is to go out and buy coffee. Whether you're buying it by the glass or by the cup at different coffee shops, or going out to different shops and trying their coffees, buying it whole bean or ordering online. The important thing with anything is to get a breadth of experience. So you could certainly, it's good to know the Starbucks product. It's certainly good to know, things like Taster's Choice, because that helps you to discern the differences. But maybe call up, different companies. And like if you're here in Baltimore, there's quite a few shops here in addition to Spro that does, nice quality coffees. Around the country, there's a lot of wonderful roasters. So wherever you happen to be, try to find the local roaster in your area and go to them and try to explore. Hopefully, when you go to these coffee shops, you'll find a sympathetic person at the coffee shop. And I have to be honest, as much as I like to tout great coffee and specialty coffee and all that, I have to acknowledge the fact that, you go to a third wave coffee shop and your results may be varied, because sometimes though people working there may not necessarily be as enthusiastic as you need them to be. And so that's a reality. But hopefully you'll find a place where some of the people that are there are really into what they're doing and willing to share and be open to someone that comes in. But, at the very least, go out and get some of the coffees. And if you want to try to taste it critically, like what we're doing here in this video, if you watch the replay, from earlier, or more importantly, if you go to some of the other videos on the Spro channel about coffee cupping, you can see exactly how to prepare a coffee cupping. And you don't have to buy specialized glasses. Like this is just something we get at the restaurant store. It's a very simple, it's basically a rocks glass, 9 ounce. So you get some of that, get yourself a, spoon, like we're using, these are soup spoons. You can even use teaspoon. You could use whatever you have. The important part is, or just brew it as you would brew at home, like in a drip pour over or whatever you want to brew it in. The important thing is that you do it consistently. So as you're tasting different coffees, do it the same way. Use the same amount of coffee, use the same amount of water, same temperature water, same brew time, even the same method of brewing. That way you have a more level comparison between the coffees. And then think about, as you're tasting, think about the coffees, think about what you're tasting, and try to develop your palate that way. More importantly, if you can, if you're at a place where they have, if you find a local shop where they have weekly cuppings or coffee tastings, attend those. That's a great way to learn, because then you can really speak with other people to expand your palate. And one of the things that I always liked was, when I'm holding public cuppings, is we're talking to people that haven't had any real professional experience. And so I think it's much, in some ways it's very fascinating, because and I encourage people when they're tasting is to describe the coffee as you feel it. Like no matter no matter how potentially ridiculous that idea may be, put it in down. I tell them, if it feels like, however you want to describe it, describe it. So I've had people, they've come to the shop, come to our tastings, and they use colors. Oh man, it tastes like purple. Oh, purple. Awesome. What does that mean? I don't really know. But the important thing is that people are starting to find ways of expressing what they're tasting. Like I've had people say things like, it tastes like Def Leppard. Oh, Def Leppard, Rock of Ages. My gosh, awesome. And so, but what that means, what does that mean? It means that like Def Leppard, let's say they're thinking Def Leppard and Rock of Ages, it's evoking an emotion, an emotional response, a memory in them. And that's to me, that is one of the biggest factors. Now, how do you take those things and put that how do you take those perceptions and put them in a way that's easily communicable to other people? Like, in a professional setting, I don't know if I could really go and say that, this coffee tastes like Rock of Ages. Maybe I could. Maybe I could print that on a bag and be like, it tastes like Rock of Ages. Like, whoa. Well, that would be catchy. Maybe we'll have to try doing that more. But important, what I'm saying is that the idea is that we want to encourage people to express themselves and not be afraid. Like, if you were to go to a wine tasting and you said, well, it tastes like, Bach's Concerto 27. Well, no, maybe not that. But you say it tastes like whatever, it tastes like Duran Duran, say, Hungry Like the Wolf. They'd probably look at you like you were weird, right? But it's kind of how you feel. Another part of it is, as you're eating, let's say you're how I developed mine was really through food. As I'm eating, I'm thinking about what I'm eating, thinking about how I would describe the food, how would I describe the different flavors and nuances and experiences in that dish. And that's really where a lot of my ability to evaluate and taste coffee really came from, that, meaning that the vocabulary for tasting came from that. And so the important thing is when you're doing that, whether you're eating or even drinking coffee or wine or anything you're consuming, really learn how to savor that. Like, so much of our time we're like banging out, right? Like yesterday, I had to go back to Virginia yesterday. So I'm down in Virginia and I look up on my phone and I find this place that does Cuban sandwiches. Here in Baltimore, we don't really have Cuban sandwiches, but I was like, oh, we're down here in Sterling again. Cuban sandwiches, I'm going to go check that out. So I get it, but I'm pressed for time to come back because it's so difficult to drive back from Northern Virginia that I had to, I grabbed this sandwich and I'm eating in the car. And, it's good. I know it's good. I'm enjoying it, but but I don't really because I'm driving and eating and drinking, I'm not really taking the time to savor what's happening. I'm not savoring. And when you're trying to develop your palate, take the time to savor whatever you're tasting. Basically, if you're, let's say if you're drinking coffee, you want to take some coffee and have some intent with it, have some purpose, just to sit back and really contemplate, what am I tasting? What is this tasting like? What is this weird sensation that's on my tongue? Try to do that. That will help more than just simply tasting everything, right? So Greg says, wow, that's a great idea. I'm going to try that. Trying different coffee shops. Yeah, try that. It's always good. It's always good. And then, so as you're tasting, from time to time, you may need to cleanse your palate. Meaning that, you want to use things like, you can use things like citrus types of fruit, bread, or even just plain water between your tastings to help cleanse your palate. So like if we're doing like coffee cuppings that are taking a long time, meaning that we're doing like lots of different samples, usually we'll take a little bit of a break between some of that, maybe a little bit of water just to cleanse the palate, just to remove the flavors that are there and start again and give it a little bit of freshness so that there's a little bit better perception. So according to you, if I find something I really like, I should stick with it. No, I think you should always explore further. Like, it's good to have something that you like that you can go back to. Like, I like Coca-Cola. I go back to Coca-Cola all the time. I like tea, like unsweetened tea. I go back to that all the time, but I'm always willing to try something else. It's always good to continue to try outside of what you're used to. That way you continue to keep your palate refreshed and open to new experiences. Another thing you might want to do is to taste everything that you can. Like I kind of touched on this a little bit before, but taste everything and anything. Like, you may hate it, but now you hate it, and you know why, because you've tasted it, you didn't like it, you thought about it in a critical way so you could figure out, okay, what don't I like about this? Like for me, there's a fruit, a vegetable called bitter melon. In Filipino language, we call it ampalaya. Personally, can't stand it. Can't stand it. I'm not a bitter kind of person. Like, I don't like bitterness, heavy bitterness in foods. That is just, to me, a turnoff. So I've had it many times, and I'll still try it. And actually, I'm working on a project right now where we're trying to figure out how to strip the bitterness out of the ampalaya and to candy it for use in pastry. That's actually a project I've been working on this last couple weeks, and it's interesting to work with something that you really kind of despise. So yeah, definitely get out there and try different things, taste everything that you can, go beyond what you're normally used to, right? It's just like yesterday when I was out. I could easily have gone to like Chick-fil-A. There was a Chick-fil-A in the same shopping center, and for me, Chick-fil-A is easy because I got the Chick-fil-A app. I can just boop, 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 done. But I've had Chick-fil-A many times. I don't have Cuban sandwich. So, went with the Cuban sandwich. Much more enjoyable. So this one's cooling down pretty nicely. It's got kind of a light lemoniness to it now. So there's that strange kind of funk, almost like maybe kind of like a light blue cheese kind of funk, and then there's a lemoniness that's kind of floating right underneath it. So it's an interesting. So Gregory's asking also, makes sense. The reason I haven't had that much coffee is because I found recently that I had lactose intolerance. Will soy almond milk be the same as normal milk to bring out the taste, texture in coffee? No, it'll be a little bit different. To be honest with you, I'm not a fan of the alternative milks. I don't necessarily have as much as lactose intolerance as other people, but I just never found the soy and almond milks, like commercial soy especially. Like, if you go to the old Chinese guy that's making the soy fresh every day, every morning, squeezing it and sweetening it by hand, that can be very, very good. But the commercial stuff that we have, even at the shop, we would have the stuff from like Costco or other like the Pacific Foods. I'm not a big fan of those. Like it tastes industrially processed to me, which really isn't to my liking. And the almond milks, I haven't really tried too much. I think when you make it, like we used to make an almond milk. We were developing it. We were developing making almond milk for the shop, but it just became too labor intensive, and then we just end up being so expensive to add to the product. But if you want to make it fresh, my gosh, that almond milk can be really, really good. I highly suggest 75% almonds and 25% macadamia, which of course using macadamia costs a lot more, but the flavor on that, maybe a little bit of sweetness, like maybe 5% sweetness, that's excellent. That's excellent. But it's different than milk. So, since you have lactose intolerance, I suggest trying to look around. And you say that you've had a lot of Starbucks and you've had a lot of instant coffees. Those coffees tend to be a little bit more problem prone. Like instant coffees, especially, the instant coffees are usually of a lower grade overall. So there's a lot more defects involved in those coffees. So which is why you get that kind of harshness, those really kind of negative like characteristics. Whereas Starbucks tends to, they buy nice quality coffee. They just tend to follow a darker roast profile. So it kind of, to me, it gives kind of a little bit of sometimes an ashy character to it, which I don't really find terribly compelling. But that's why I'm suggesting go around and find some other coffees. Try other coffees. Try to find better quality coffees. And, of course, better quality will mean higher prices. That's just kind of the name of the game. The better quality ingredient that you want to source, it does cost more. However, I think you'll find, after experimenting a while, you probably will find coffees that you don't feel the compelling need to put cream and sugar. Like, for the most part, I drink coffee black, just like we're doing here. Now, I'll be honest. I'm in a luxurious position where the coffees that I'm usually drinking are usually very good, very well sourced, very well processed, very well roasted. Hopefully well prepared. Although I'm the one preparing it, so that mileage may vary. But they're usually of good quality coffees, and so I don't really have the compelling need to have any kind of milk or cream and sugar with my coffees. Now, however, if I go out to the diner, right, like the local diner, which makes great pancakes and grits and ham steak and fried eggs, and I'm having that kind of breakfast, I like to have coffee with that. And the coffee at the local diner is that kind of like coffee that's quite problematic. Lots of defects, very dirty tasting, rough tasting. So in that case, I prefer to use a little bit of cream and a little bit of sugar just to smoothen that out, right? Smoothen that out. Which reminds me, though, as you're tasting product and developing your palates, also one thing you want to do is beware of things like sugar and salt, right? Too much of either prevents your ability to taste. It includes your senses, right? So you don't want to do that. You want to keep your senses clean. Now, that being said, I do think that both salt and sugar in small quantities are wonderful enhancers to flavor. Like you can make things punch. Like you could take a coffee and a little tiny bit of sugar and it kind of punches that flavor a little bit, right? Just kind of like how with like food, a little bit of salt punches that flavor just a little bit. Like when you're tasting that protein or whatever it is, and it's just slightly bland, you're like, doesn't really have, it's not too exciting. A little bit of salt, boom, awesome. Oh man, that tastes much better. Kind of like that. But if you put too much salt, oh man, you're in trouble. Like just like if you put too much sugar, that's not very exciting either. So you can use salt and sugar in small quantities just as a kind of a flavor enhancer. But not too much, because otherwise it becomes more difficult for you to taste. Yeah, that's tasting pretty nice. And also, if you're out there trying different coffees from different roasters and coffee shops, you know, buy them by the bag, and then you know what you can do, especially if you start, if you're like, if you get a little bit crazy about it, and you start, oh, I'm going to buy this bag and this bag and that bag, and you've gone to 4 different roasting places and you've gotten 4 different bags, and it's only you drinking. Well, how can you finish that in any reasonable amount of time? One thing you can do is to take those coffees and store them in your freezer, not your refrigerator, but the freezer, like where it's really, really cold, below zero, and that will hold your coffees as fresh as possible. And what I do is, because I get a lot of coffees from people in the coffee business, and sometimes I get far more coffees than I can possibly utilize. Like my cousin came from Hawaii yesterday and he's like, hey, I brought you some coffee. Awesome, dude. This is awesome. It's great coffee, but I don't really need coffee. I got plenty. I can't go through it fast enough, right? So what I do is I keep them in freezer. So I put, I just keep them in the normal bag, wrap them up tight, put them in the freezer. When I need them, take out just enough to brew, and that's great. That's great. So we've got Edsel here. Edsel says, I recently got into specialty coffee and I really love the wide spectrum of flavors. Drinking black really made me understand the different flavors. Yes, excellent. And that's what we're saying is that when you add cream and sugar, those tend to occlude your ability to taste. And which is why I think it's fantastic to use cream and sugar in diner type of coffees, or coffees that I find to be a little bit on the detestable side, because it helps to make it palatable, because those negative characteristics, or those characteristics of that coffee that I find to be negative, are diminished because of the cream and sugar, right? So they're diminished by the cream, and then they're kind of glossed over by the sugar. So yeah, so if you really want to get past that, that's the best way. So Gregory's asking us also a side question. What camera are you using? So for this camera that I'm using right now is the Sony ZV-1. So it's the fixed, it's the point and shoot, what does it say? 9.4 to 25.7 millimeters, which is, I don't know, they say it's like a 20 millimeter, full frame equivalent with a 1.8 to 2.8 lens. So it's got, excuse me. If you're thinking about a camera for YouTubing, this is a great camera. I really like it. I spent a bit of time trying to figure out which one to go with, and I bought it about over a year ago. I bought it in June or July of 2020, and it's been great. It's been a great camera. I use it pretty much for most of the videos that you see on the channel. So both on Spro Coffee channel as well as on the Ono Coffee channel. And I use it as the live streaming camera. Actually, it's been such a good camera that I've been thinking about getting a separate camera to do live streams, or a secondary camera. And my local camera shop has, typically on different weeks, we'll have many of the Sony A6000 series, 6000, 63, whatever. I don't really understand all those, but they always have them. They have the interchangeable E-mount lenses. But I haven't. But this one's so much easier to use. Those, you have to get dummy batteries, you have to get lenses, you have to do all this other rigmarole. This one, you can plug the USB directly into it. It'll power through the USB, and it runs like a champ. It's run like a champ. So if you're thinking about it, the ZV-1, I highly recommend it. I also use the Canon M50, which I had been kind of down on until we did this shoot last weekend. We were shooting in Falls Church for an upcoming video on the Ono Coffee channel, and we ended up having to shoot in direct sunlight, and the ZV-1, this camera, kept cutting out because of the thermal heat warning indicators, even though I have it set to the high point, and it's never really shut down on thermal heat on it. But of course, the sunlight is pounding directly on it. I don't have any flags to cover it, so it was really pretty brutal on it. However, the M50, sitting a foot away from it, also in direct sun, never shut down the entire day. And I was like, oh, that was really impressive. Really, really impressive. So, does it make sense? Good. Yeah, yeah. Give that a try too. Give that a try too. Definitely try black. Black is going to be the most clear way for you to try different coffees. And that's what we do here. Like, for example, we're doing these cupping style tasting today. And it's all black. And the idea is you want it to be black so that you can taste everything that's available to you, even when it's not so pleasant. You know, I was cupping in Uganda come on now, it's been like, gosh, it's pushing on 3 years now since I've been there last. But, you know, I'll go to the UCDA, which is the Uganda Coffee Development Authority, to their labs. And I'll hang out there when I'm in Kampala. And, you know, sometimes I'll get to sit in on their cuppings. And what the UCDA is in charge of is that they cup and grade every coffee that's exported out of the country. So they have the entire spectrum from high-end specialty that we're looking at to the quote-unquote lowest of the low of the commercial grade stuff, like the stuff that they're selling to, quite honestly, to prisons and the military. You know, those guys get, my understanding is they get the worst. But, you know, it's interesting to taste with them because they're tasting, you know, where we're looking for attributes of coffee, and it's for specialty coffees, we're looking for attributes. At that level, and that style of they're actually looking for defects. They're looking to find how many defects are in the coffee, identify them, and determine if they meet the specifications. So, for example, with commercial coffees, the companies that are buying them will say, we have this many allowable defects. And so that's what they're looking for. Does the number of defects in the coffee exceed the amount that's allowable under that contract? And if not, they're good to ship it. If they don't, then they have to do something else or find another buyer or something like that. I'm not really quite totally clear on what happens in that level because I've never really I've never done business with that level of coffee. Yeah, so it's interesting, but I think it's interesting. I think it's utterly fascinating because you're now tasting coffees that are very, very different than, you know, you have coffees that have flavorings of tar, diesel, you know, dirt from like coffee berry borer damage, things like that, where in specialty, the higher end stuff, we don't really run into because all of that is sorted out and the processing of the coffee is very, very careful. You know, there's no over fermentation because the coyote was taking the coffee from the mountains, from the farmer, down to wherever he's processing it, right? So there's a lot of things that can go on, and yeah, that's pretty much it. What else do we need to tell you about developing your palate? You know, like I said earlier, use whatever descriptors that come to your mind. You know, like I tend not to think of it in matters of like, oh, it tastes like this color. It tastes like yellow. Or, oh, this has the flavor of fuchsia. You know, over time I learned how to develop descriptives that were a little bit more accurate as far as communicating to others. And over time, that will happen to you as well, the more you think about it. And it really is just like anything. You want to practice and engage in it. And the practice really is just about thinking about what you're tasting while you're eating. And you pretty much eat every day. So you're always, the opportunity to practice is always available to you. And it's not like going to the gym where you have to go out to the gym and like do something you don't want to do, right? You just go and you just eat. You're just, I'm eating. I got to eat now. What does this taste like? What does this 7-Eleven pizza taste like? Maybe it has a little bit of textures of cardboard. You know, whatever you're doing, just try it. Give that a try. See what you think. All right, we're almost out of time now. Time to head back out into the world. If you have any questions about coffee, leave them in the comments below. If you're watching this on the replay, you can leave comments below, and I will talk about them next week. But otherwise, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much for spending the time with me. We're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Did I say 8 a.m. before? Sometimes I say 8 a.m. I don't know why I keep doing that. But we're here Tuesday mornings, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And then if you want more coffee with cigars, we have a coffee and cigar live stream that happens on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. And that's in, look at this. Edsel says he's going to try doing that at the Palate. Good. You should, man. How's the baby, by the way, Edsel? How's the baby? I'm trying that Palate this week. Trying to get it to be without the bitterness and with some sweetness. But anyway, so yeah, we're here. And then Coffee and Cigars is on Thursday night on the Ono Coffee channel. So check that out. And if you're in need of coffee, check out our website, sprocoffee.com. We've got beautiful coffees that I source personally. And of course, I think it's really good stuff. Your mileage may vary. But anyway, so if you have time, come see us again, spend a little time with us, or watch us in the replay. We really appreciate you either way. If you have time to subscribe, perfect, awesome. Love that too. All right, well, hope your week will be great. See you next time.